Trail off in the club just to show the
She was probably one of the first women's basketball players I really grew up idolizing.
And you said that Caitlin is going to go through a learning curve.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, a lot was made of this matchup between yourself and Diana Taurasi. I know she's one of your idols.
Some people were critical of you for saying that, but I don't know that it necessarily meant that you're not welcoming to her, right?
The scary part about this Caitlin Clark game is not how well she played. It is what the game meant. This was not just Clark versus Phoenix. This was Clark stepping into Diana Taurasi's world and showing that the future of the WNBA was not waiting politely for permission. That is why this game still matters. At the time, people saw the obvious story on the surface.
Look, SVP, reality is coming.
Okay.
You know, there's levels to this thing, and that's just life. We all went through it.
Caitlin Clark was the rookie phenom. Diana Taurasi was the veteran legend. Phoenix was one of the league's most established teams. The atmosphere felt charged. The attention was massive. The tension was impossible to ignore. But looking back now, this game feels much bigger than it did in the moment. This was never really about one regular season night. It was about what happens when a player arrives with more noise, more pressure, and more expectation than the league is fully comfortable with.
There's going to be a transition period where you're going to have to give yourself some grace as a rookie. And, you know, it might take a little bit longer for some people.
And then proves she is not just built for the spotlight. She is built to control what happens inside it. That was the real significance of this game.
Hey, you be studying my arms?
Yeah, you got some good arms.
Yeah, I do. It's pretty nice. I think at times, like, yeah, I'm small, but like, I try to hold my own the best I can. And
Diana Taurasi was never just another name on the schedule. She represented something much bigger. She represented legacy, authority, and the old guard of the WNBA. She represented the players who built this league, fought for its respect, and believed nobody should be crowned before they had truly earned it. And to be fair, that mentality did not come from nowhere. Players like Taurasi built their reputations through years of production, toughness, championships, and surviving eras that received far less attention than today's game.
she was probably one of the first women's basketball players I really grew up idolizing.
She came out of the Yukon machine, one of the most powerful pipelines in women's basketball history, and carried that same standard into the pros. So when Caitlin Clark entered that environment, she was not just facing a defense. She was facing a mindset. She was stepping into a basketball culture that was not interested in handing out easy approval. She was stepping into a veteran generation that had seen hype before and was not going to bow to it just because the cameras were bigger. This was a league that wanted proof, not excitement.
I mean, how do you I mean, it seems like you were just saying the reality is she's going to have a learning curve.
Yeah, you know, it's the new fans are really sensitive these days.
That is exactly why this night mattered. Clark did not look like someone asking permission to belong. She looked like someone forcing the game to adjust to her. That is a very different thing. A lot of players can get hot for a quarter. A lot of young stars can have one flashy night and make people overreact. That is not what made this game special. What made it special was the level of control. Clark did not just make shots. She imposed herself on the rhythm of the game. She changed the spacing. She changed the decisions Phoenix had to make. She changed where the pressure started. She changed how quickly the defense had to think. Once that starts happening, a game stops being about effort and starts becoming about survival.
First in the league in fast break points.
Clark connects on a deep three.
That is the effect players like Caitlin Clark have when they are fully in command. Defenses stop reacting to the ball. They start reacting to the possibility of what she might do next. That is where the panic begins. Because with Clark, there is never just one problem. If you pick her up high, she stretches you into uncomfortable territory. If you hang back, she has the confidence and range to punish it. If you send help, she sees the floor quickly enough to move the defense before it can recover.
Wheeler finds Clark from the logo.
If you try to rough her up and turn it into a physical battle, she can still manipulate pace and create chaos without looking rushed. That is what separates exciting players from disruptive players. Exciting players make highlights. Disruptive players make the other team feel unstable. That is what Phoenix was feeling. It was not just the pressure of her scoring, it was the pressure of her presence. Every possession against a player like Clark starts to feel loaded. Every decision becomes heavier. Every mistake feels bigger. When that kind of tension builds, it starts affecting the entire shape of the game. That is why this was such a meaningful answer to the Taurasi conversation. Because the real question people had about Clark was never whether she could hit tough shots. Everybody already knew she could do that. The real question was whether she could still be herself against the kind of veteran resistance designed to test her emotionally, mentally, and physically.
You can't say anything. Yeah, you know, it's kind of like when you go from kindergarten to first grade, there's a learning adjustment. When you go from high school to college, there's a learning adjustment. You know, I don't think I said anything that wasn't factually correct.
Could she handle the tone? Could she handle the skepticism? Could she handle the attention without letting it speed her up? Could she walk into a building with all that history staring back at her and still impose her own game? That night, the answer was yes. And not a quiet yes either, a loud one. Clark did not play like someone hoping to survive the moment. She played like someone who already understood the moment belonged to her if she was good enough to take it. That is a mentality shift. Once you look at the game through that lens, everything about it becomes more interesting. For months, the conversation around Caitlin Clark had been filled with everything except clarity. There was too much hype, too much backlash, too much overreaction, too much obsession with whether the attention around her was fair, unfair, deserved, or inflated. Some people wanted her crowned immediately. Others wanted her humbled immediately. Somewhere in the middle, the actual basketball kept getting buried under the noise.
Who plays the style that how Caitlin
What is her
plays?
style? Just threes?
Wow.
It's not just threes.
What is her style?
That is why nights like this matter so much. They strip the conversation back down to its foundation. Can the player affect winning? Can the player control pressure? Can the player force veteran teams to break their own structure? Can the player make the game bend around her? Against Phoenix, Clark looked like someone doing exactly that. That is why this game has aged so well. Now, with hindsight, it no longer looks like an isolated rookie flashpoint. It looks like an early confirmation. It looks like an early sign that Caitlin Clark was not just going to survive the WNBA. She was going to alter the emotional and competitive gravity around it.
Yeah, when I was sitting down in my seat all the way down there, I looked in every single corner of the Footprint Center to just make sure that somebody was sitting in every single seat, and they are.
That is what makes this more than a simple Clark versus Taurasi storyline. This was not just rookie versus legend. It was visibility versus legacy, momentum versus authority. A new commercial center of gravity colliding with an established hierarchy that had every reason to be skeptical. What made it powerful is that Clark did not seem overwhelmed by any of that symbolism. She looked prepared for it. That is the thing about stars who change eras. They do not arrive cautiously. They arrive looking like they have already accepted the burden everyone else is still arguing about. That is what Clark looked like in this game. Not just talented, ready for the scrutiny, ready for the aggression, ready for the tone veteran teams were going to set against her, ready for the resentment that naturally comes when one player enters a league and suddenly the cameras, the conversation, and the energy all begin orbiting around her. And that resentment was always going to be part of the story. Because when a new star shows up and the whole ecosystem starts shifting around them, it forces everybody else to confront something uncomfortable. The league may be changing, and not everyone gets to control how that change happens.
Courtsides were going for as high as $2,000 for the front row for this game.
That is why the Taurasi angle remains so compelling. Taurasi stood for standards, earned respect, and battle-tested greatness. She stood for a generation that believed you should prove yourself before the world starts treating you like the future. That is not an unreasonable position. But Clark's arrival presented a challenge to that model. She was not just bringing attention. She was bringing substance strong enough to justify the attention. That is what made her impossible to dismiss. If she were just famous, the game would expose her. If she were just popular, veteran teams would eventually swallow her up. If she were just a media creation, none of this would have held under real pressure. But that was never the case. What made this night in Phoenix so powerful is that Clark looked like a player whose game could actually carry the size of the moment around her. That is when skepticism starts losing power. Not when the headlines get loud, but when the film gets undeniable. And in this game, the film was undeniable. It said she could handle pressure. It said she could handle veteran structure. It said she could walk into a loaded environment and still be the player everyone else had to react to. It said she could make Phoenix uncomfortable in ways that went deeper than a stat line. That is why this felt like an answer. Not because one game ended every debate. It did not. Not because every veteran suddenly changed their mind. They did not. Not because all the tension disappeared after this. It did not. What it did do was force a different question.
Obviously, a lot was made of this matchup between yourself and Diana Taurasi. I know she's one of your idols. How big is it for you to get a win here against her today?
I'm just happy we won. It was cool to play against her, and obviously a really great game. And like you said, this crowd was absolutely incredible.
Instead of asking, does Caitlin Clark really belong here? The conversation started moving towards something much more dangerous for the rest of the league. What happens if she is even bigger than people expected? That is the real shift. Once that question enters the picture, people are no longer debating whether the rookie can survive. Now they are imagining what happens if the rookie becomes a force the league must reorganize around. That is exactly why this game feels so significant now. Today, it is easier to see what this game was pointing toward. It was pointing toward a player who could carry more than hype, more than headlines, and more than fan obsession. It was pointing toward a player who could create real basketball leverage and cultural leverage at the same time. That combination is rare. A lot of stars can play. A lot of stars can draw attention. Very few can do both at once in a way that shifts the emotional center of an entire league. Clark was already showing signs of that here, and Phoenix could feel it. That is why this was never just about one team getting beaten. This was about a system of resistance being forced to deal with a reality it could not simply brush aside. That is why silencing Phoenix is not really about silence in the literal sense. It is about stripping away the excuses. For one night, all the outside noise faded just enough for the real basketball truth to come into focus. And that truth was uncomfortable for anybody hoping Caitlin Clark would shrink under this level of pressure. She did not shrink. She clarified. She clarified what kind of player she was becoming. She clarified why defenses were struggling to contain her. She clarified why so many reactions to her had become emotional in the first place. Because the threat was never just her popularity. The threat was what her game was capable of confirming. She was not just arriving. She was accelerating something.
Caitlin's been able to do in her short career so far has just been nothing short of remarkable.
And when a player starts accelerating the future of a league, the pushback becomes inevitable. That is what made this clash with Taurasi so symbolic. Taurasi came from one of the most established basketball bloodlines in the sport. UConn was not just a school. It was a standard, a network, and a culture of credibility. It helped shape how greatness in women's basketball was defined for years. So when Clark stepped into that broader world and still imposed herself, it felt like more than a matchup. It felt like a shift in the center of gravity, not the past disappearing, not the old guard becoming irrelevant, but a new force becoming too real to contain with skepticism alone. That is why fans remember the game. Even if they could not fully articulate it in the moment, they could feel what it represented. They could feel the tension between what the league had been and what it was becoming. Clark looked like the bridge between those two realities, except not a passive bridge, an active one, a disruptive one. She looked like a player forcing the transition to happen faster than some people were ready for. That is why this game still hits. Because when you look back now, this was not just Caitlin Clark having one of those nights. This was Caitlin Clark stepping into one of the most loaded environments a rookie could face and answering it with control, composure, and pressure. She did not answer with words. She answered with pace, with reads, with range, with poise, and with the kind of command that makes every argument against her start sounding weaker after the final buzzer. That is why this game remains one of the most telling early chapters of the Caitlin Clark era. It captured the exact moment when the old guard could feel that the future was no longer waiting politely outside the door. It was already inside, already affecting the game, already changing the temperature, already forcing established powers to react. That is what made it unforgettable. It was not just a rookie performance, it was a warning shot. A message that the attention around Caitlin Clark was not empty, that the pressure was not too big for her, and that the league was not just dealing with hype, it was dealing with a real force. And on that night in Phoenix against Diana Taurasi's world, Caitlin Clark made that impossible to ignore. If you see the WNBA the same way we do here on Courtside Leaks, beyond the headlines, beyond the box score, and into what these moments really mean, subscribe to the channel because we are going to keep breaking down the stories, power shifts, and turning points shaping this league in real time.